One man with total control of billions of people's stolen data, all their secrets, their lives, their futures.
As you may have already realized, this is not Mark Zuckerberg. Computer-generated videos like this one are known as deepfakes after a 2017 Reddit user of the same name began posting doctored videos on the site.
To address their concerns, their hopes, and their dreams.
Obviously, the potential for serious harms with these deepfakes is quite great. On elections, international states, for diplomatic purposes, and even for our private lives. That's why we as a country need to take swift action and invest in the research and the tools for identifying and combating deepfakes, and create a national strategy immediately, especially for election integrity and ahead of the 2020 presidential election. We already know of Russia's intentional campaign to spread disinformation throughout the last one, and I don't even want to imagine what Russia or China or just private players, the havoc they could wreak on our elections and our personal lives.
For bringing attention to the problems of deep fake technology. And go Navy, beat Army.
So I will say media manipulation is really not a new thing. As I mentioned, we have some examples in the 1860s. That was about 20 years after the first photography was ever made in human history. About 100 years later, with the computers, with the internet and digital camera, we have Photoshops, and then we start to see fake photographs, and making photographs is much easier. Forrest Gump is one famous example where they actually put Gump into this video sequence.
Congratulations. How do you feel?
I gotta pee.
I believe he said he had to go pee.
Making fake videos are difficult, but it's also possible. So it's usually what Hollywood big studios can make them with big budgets. My general research interest is in computer vision and machine learning with a special focus on digital media forensics, which is essentially tell if a piece of digital media, including image, video, or audio, it has been manipulated digitally in some way. With the abundance of online media we share, anyone is a potential target of a deepfake attack. Blinking is a subconscious activity that normal person usually blinks between 8 seconds, 6 seconds to 10 seconds. And if you have a longer video that the person does not blink, this probably give us some kind of some cue that this may not be a real video. The face, the head is moving in 3D, but the face is actually pasted on with a 2D transform. And the 2D transform always some discrepancy. Well, I think there's no doubt that this technology gonna grow as as time goes by. And there's a huge amount of interest actually on the research side of generating more realistic images as close as possible to human voice or human faces. It can be used in either a good way or a bad way, depends on who's gonna use it.
It's really hard to give a sense of the growing and global scale of the issue, but here are a few recent examples. Today, a report by my colleagues over at the Oxford Internet Institute highlighted that more than 70 countries currently use computational propaganda techniques to manipulate public opinion online. Since October 2018, Twitter has disclosed information around more than 25,000 accounts associated with information operations in 10 different countries. On Facebook, over 40 million users have followed pages that Facebook has taken down for being involved in what they call coordinated inauthentic behavior.
Now politicians increase their spends, increase their budget for social media operations, and there's a budget for the legitimate official campaigns. So these are the maintenance of the official profile on Facebook, but also Instagram, on Twitter, and YouTube. But they also have budget for these underground black ops operations where it's about creating these communities.
In reality, if I'm a government trying to manipulate social media, what I want to do is I really want to hide inside organic groups of people, right? And it's going to be really hard to go and look at a group and say, actually, those accounts are not real people, are not part of an organic campaign. They're part of an information operation that a state is conducting. So in order to do that, we look at patterns at a large scale, because if you have a small number of accounts who are trying to replicate the organic diversity of a large number of accounts, there are different ways in which they're going to fail. And we say, okay, well, that campaign doesn't move like an organic campaign of people just coming online together. And so sometimes you have, a campaign with people who are behind it who didn't try to hide very much. And so, for instance, you can look at the email addresses that are behind an account, or the IP address when they're coming from. But sometimes it can be really difficult because you can have actors who are really keen to hide their identities. In cybersecurity, we call it OPSEC, operational security. It can be very difficult to tell who's behind an account. Digital forensics can be quite hard in some cases.
To what's being called a bold move by Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, announcing plans to ban all political ads as the 2020 campaigns ramp up.
Would I be able to run advertisements on Facebook targeting Republicans in primaries saying that they voted for the Green New Deal? I mean, if you're not fact-checking political advertisements, I'm just trying to understand the bounds here. What's fair game?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think
so. You don't know if I'll be able to do that.
You know, we talk about the disruptions in media climate over the past 15 years, and, you know, Facebook has been a huge contributor to that. You know, just the fact that it's played like a universal role in people's lives.
What is the right intervention here? And one advocate is, let's just ban these people. Let's just take this down. Let's lobby Facebook to invest in content moderation, which is precisely about finding hurtful words and banning those people forever from the platform. And we say that that's important. That's one component of it. But that's also about taking down content and fake news that is already out there. And is already out in the wild, that has already been circulated, right? This could be easily weaponized, particularly in communities, in national contexts, where there's authoritarian aspiring leaders.
I think Duterte has taken out all the rules. He has green-lighted extrajudicial executions. He has harassed and bullied opponents. He's insulted the President of the United States and the United Nations.
We see this in Malaysia, we see this in Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines, where there are attempts to regulate fake news, and the solution to fake news is actually even worse than the actual disease. To actually silence the opposition, to muffle people who are expressing political dissent. And that's why in our research, we're trying to argue against content regulation, which we can't rely on the government to tell us what is fake news or not.
And so the trust level, that sort of gut reaction to trusting the news I get on social media is very low. And we also ask about sort of, do you think it's generally accurate or inaccurate? And you have more people that would say it's largely inaccurate. It's majorities that also say it's not really helping me be more informed about the events of the day. But at the same time, they turn to it, and the main reason they say they turn to it is for convenience. You know, there's sort of these caution flags that people may have in their head, but they're definitely still going to use it.
In the newspaper, you could skip from story to story, but the default is once you start reading a story, the default thing is keep reading that story. Whereas in social media, the default is get immediately on to the next story, and you have to put in extra effort to then click out, open it up, and go through the story in its entirety.
A lot of things in that space come to you as opposed to you needing to seek them out.
I think it's hard for the artificial intelligence algorithms to keep up with the continually changing target of what makes something misinformation.
Every time we detect a new technique, we see people inventing another technique.
What we've been working on a lot is the power of the wisdom of crowds. The classic example of this was, from the early 1900s. At some county fair, there was an ox, and a guy went and had people guess what's the weight of the ox. And any individual person had no idea. Once he averaged the answers of a whole bunch of people, it was exactly right. And this has been shown in all different kinds of domains. And so I think the big question right now is how well does the wisdom of crowds work in identifying fake news and misinformation. But I think that the advantage of the crowd approach is you don't need trained experts. If you're Facebook, for example, you have a lot of money to throw at this problem if you were so inclined. And so you can hire a big crowd if the crowd doesn't have to have any particular expertise or skills.
Right now we have the destruction of truth itself. Right now we have people trying to say there is no truth. It's just which side are you on? That's just treating the information space as a complete game.
There are always going to be very loud voices on the fringes of both sides advocating things that will generate, conversation. But if we focus on how, they can sustain financial operations by doing this, that's an area that I think that everyone can agree on deserves action.
It has to be human first, machine second. On the one hand, there is a role for automation, for artificial intelligence, for machine learning, because the scale of the problem calls for that. But on the other hand, it has to be guided by humans, of course, right? By deep expertise, by people who truly understand the nuances of the problem and the trade-offs that come with it.
NewsGuard is a browser plugin currently, and it works on Safari and Chrome and Firefox and Edge, and it's the result of humans looking at news and information websites and trying to figure out whether or not those websites are credible or transparent.
What we try to do at NewsGuard is to restore some order and some sense of context. We've hired dozens of journalists who read and review and rate websites. It's a process that typically involves 5 or 6 layers of people, starting with the person who drafts what we call the nutrition label and the rating.
These different shields, these are our reviews, and if you hover over it, you can see that we think this website, usnews.com, is generally reliable, and we explain the different criteria, whether it's a yes or no for those things. And we also have a full report. We call it a nutrition label.
We've rated about 3,700 news sites in the United States, Italy, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. And in each of those countries, those sites are responsible for at least 90% of the news and information consumed online in those countries.
If you come to a website maybe you're not familiar with, you'll see our red shield. And so we think that this website severely violates basic standards of credibility and transparency. And again, we sort of explain all our rationale for any of those no's. It also shows up in Facebook feeds and Twitter feeds. So if you come across a website in a headline that you've not heard about or don't know anything about, we've probably rated it, and you can, make your own decision if you think that website is reliable or not.
What we've designed this whole thing to be is the opposite of an algorithm. First of all, we're completely accountable. All of our work is right there. We're completely transparent. We call for comment if any news site seems not to be living up to even one of the 9 criteria, even if it's relatively minor, we call for comment. The last difference is, unlike an algorithm, we want people to game our system. We want news sites to see, well, gee, if I did this, if I had a corrections policy, for example, I can get a higher score from NewsGuard. And so far, over 600 different news sites here and around the world have changed something about what they do in order to get a higher score.
As the volume of data grows, so does the chance of handling misinformation that challenges both the machine and human ability to uncover the truth.
So it's really important, I think, to zoom out and look at this problem set as something that's really about consumer protections and access to information.
Too many factors, too many viewpoints, too many arguments. But what if there were right answers? What if they've been right here under our noses all this time, and we've been too busy trying to prove ourselves right to notice?
The role of consumers is to become more knowledgeable consumers of information, to be more knowledgeable about all those headlines that they see on their newsfeed.
That's always the important piece of it. You need to be asking a lot of questions about what it is that you're doing, what are you engaging with, whether it's a written text, a video text, a sound text.
I'm hoping that a lot of this resources and strategies is more accessible to all schools, and all schools understand how to implement it better.
If we pretend that the problem is entirely new, we will forget the old solutions. The old solutions tell us to eliminate inequality, to address poverty, to educate our citizenry, to make people less susceptible to fear and anxiety.
Information campaigns right before elections are problematic and have been problematic for a long time. It's like social media didn't invent that, but it's certainly possible that social media exacerbates it by making it easier for things to really spread widely.
Everyone is really intent on limiting the actual impact of these kinds of disinformation networks. However, the landscape is constantly changing on a regular basis, so it's a constant arms race between the disinformation networks and the ad exchanges and other kind of platforms that do not want disinformation spreading across the internet.
Going forward, if you're going to deal with these informational problems, you're going to have to make the people less susceptible to them.
This program is made possible with support from Connecticut Humanities.